Good morning. My name is Michael R. Roser, and I am co-founder of Strategic Life Coaching, LLC. And please join us for this video and others at my website, abundantlifeslc.com. Today, it's my distinct pleasure to talk to you today about life in general and living an abundant life. And this is something that's very important to me because it allows me to come full circle in my life, which is not only to be given this new life and this peace and serenity freely, but now I have the opportunity to give it back in such a meaningful and profound way. I found in my travels that life is certainly not a bed of roses, although for a long time it seemed to be, and the challenges come up in your life. And it's what you do with those challenges that come up that really define your character going forward. It's very easy to live life and to be happy when things are going great. Money is flowing in, cash flow, your investments are going up, yada, yada. Buying new cars and new material things and having the trappings of what appears to be a successful, peaceful life. However, challenges do come up. And 5 years ago, almost to the day actually, I was having a really bad day. And my day started, unfortunately, like it usually did, with a pretty significant addiction to alcohol. And as I got up in the morning with trembles and shakes, I needed alcohol to try to quiet what was what I call a rabbit cage of a mind. And so as the day progressed, I stopped and did some work at the office and so forth, and was getting, I found, more and more upset due to my ex-wife, but estranged wife at the time, and her needing me for various different things. And so in the afternoon, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, after a day of uneasiness and getting some work done at the office, market heading down, so forth, I drove over to across the street actually to my ex's house, estranged wife at the time, and very, very slightly bumped a school bus that had stopped unexpectedly right in front of me. There was no damage done to either of the bus or the car. I waved at the bus driver and said, "Hey, there's nothing wrong," and pulled into my ex's house, and we had a discussion about some things that she wanted me to do, which upset me very much, and I went back to across the street to where I was living at the time, which was my office, and began to medicate myself as I always did with alcohol. Obviously overdid it and woke up to the sound of a megaphone. And I called my wife across the street and said, "Anna, there's people surrounding my house. What the heck is going on?" And she said, "Well, you haven't been answering the door, and they've been trying to get in, and you hit that school bus, and the school bus driver stopped, and they had to unload the kids, and all of this stuff had been spiraling and escalating out of control to the point where there was a SWAT team in the trees and surrounding my house asking me to come out with my hands up." And I could not believe that this had occurred. And I was talking to one of the policemen on the phone, and they were in a very, very bad mood and had shut down Route 176 on a Friday afternoon, a football Friday afternoon, mind you, because of me. And so I went out with my hands up and knees on the ground, and they threw me into an ambulance, took me to the hospital, and ended up spending quite a bit of time in the hospital and having people do all kinds of things that I will not share here because frankly it's too awful sometimes for me to even remember. As a result of that, I found that, at least I thought, that my life was over. My reputation was shot. My wife was gone. My business was struggling and probably going to be gone now. I showed up in the newspaper uh, and they had embellished, frankly, the story quite a bit. Neither here nor there. I was definitely having a very bad day. As a result of that, I found myself declining further into the disease of alcoholism, getting more in despair, more helpless, and more hopeless. And finally, as I made it back after a week of detoxing myself on my own, having very kind people from the program of Alcoholics Anonymous pleading with me to go to uh, the hospital, I detoxed myself, and on a Monday morning, February 8th, 2020, with the help of some wonderful people, I managed to get myself back to an AA meeting at 7 a.m. on Monday morning that day. As I was leaving that meeting, a very kind gentleman came up to me, and pardon me for the French, but he got in my personal space very close to me and said, "Michael, what the fuck are you doing? You're dying, both physically and emotionally, and you're bankrupt spiritually right in front of me, and I'm not going to allow it to happen." And he asked me one of the most important questions that's ever been asked to me in my adult life. He simply said to me, "Michael, who are you accountable to today?" And that stopped me in my tracks, and I said, "Well, nobody." And he said, "That's the first honest thing, truly honest thing, that you've said in the 11 years that I've known you walking in and out of these rooms. I would like you to call me at 9 o'clock. This is a man, I promise you, that I would not have picked to be my sponsor, which is a person that helps you walk through the steps of the program, the spiritual life, and attaining that spiritual life. And he is not anybody that I ever would have picked on my own. And that's the point, that for the first time in a long time, God entered my life and I was actually listening. God as I understand God. God can stand for good orderly direction, which I desperately needed at the time. It can stand for the great outdoors, or it can be a Judeo-Christian God that I understand, that I try to understand, I should say, and I call God. So I called him at 9 o'clock, and he understood exactly where I was and what I was going through, because he had been there and gone through it 10 years prior and offered to walk me through the steps. Now, again, this is not somebody that I would have picked, but I was desperate, helpless, and hopeless. I knew that my life was not going anywhere to any means, so I had no choice. So I said, okay, and I proceeded to call him then at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, every hour until I went to sleep, every day, for about 2 months. And during that process, and I can't even describe to you how much this man saved my life, because he mentioned a couple things in there at the very beginning. Physically, he could see the dreadful toll that that disease had taken on my body physically. He could also see the toll by my talking and by the way that I was so desperate and emotional, that I needed work there. But where he really attacked me was spiritually, and he said I was bankrupt spiritually. So over the days and months that pursued, he walked me through a 12-step process, a spiritual process and a spiritual way of living that I owe my life to. And he gave back what he had received so freely 10 years earlier, and he walked me precisely through those steps. But I had to listen, and I had to have my ego and my pride punctured until a point where I could actually make some progress. The most meaningful part was the step in the spiritual program that calls for taking a fearless moral inventory of oneself. And that's listing all of the things, all the people that you're mad at, all the things that you're afraid of. And believe me, I thought I wasn't afraid of anything. I'm a 6'4", 210-pound man. I'm not afraid of anything. Well, by introspection and the enlightenment of that process, I found I was afraid of a lot of things. And what's interesting is fear stands for fantasized experiences appearing real. So not only had I a bunch of problems, like having a SWAT team surround my house and the legal ramifications of that, I had a lot of fancied problems, things that I had blown way out of proportion, things that I thought existed that didn't exist. So I had to write all of that down, and it's a very painful process, but one that I encourage everyone to go through, because the better you know yourself, the better you're able to fix the things inside of you that are missing, the reason I drank in the first place. I do have some diagnosed mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic syndrome disorder, which I have to take medication for each day. And without that medication, I can't live an emotionally balanced life, and I understand that now. But again, going through these steps, I made the decision to go see my intern and to go see a psychologist and to get those medications balanced. So now I take my pill every morning and I'm able to live a peaceful, abundant, balanced life. So as I went through that process, as I went through step 4, I began to see patterns. I began to see where I had brought my selfishness and self-centeredness into the situation. And every time I would get off rail and my ego and my pride would come back in my defense of my life, Tim would say, well, how's that working for you, Mike? You know, and that was a revelation to me, because he then pointed to me where I actually was in my life. Not what I thought I was, not what I was 20 years ago, what I was at that present moment. Well, what was I? I was 302 pounds, tremendously deconditioned and out of shape. My cholesterol was very, very high. My blood pressure was extraordinarily high. I was not taking my medications they were sitting there in the cabinet for my anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic syndrome disorder. I didn't think I needed them. And when I took them and they wasn't as prescribed, so on and so forth. I took an inventory of the relationships in my life, all of them, top to bottom. And they weren't very good, and a lot of reconciling needed to be done. So I then decided, after that process, which is about 120 days into it, as of the time of this video, by the way, today is 803 days of living a sober spiritual life. But for the grace of God go I. So as I found out about me, then I decided, okay, now I don't want to be that person that I had become any longer. And so now what do I do to amend and change, really change, not saying I'm sorry, but really change who I am? So I took all of that stuff. I went and met with some people that were very close to me, my priest, my doctor, very, very close and dear friends, and I unloaded on them and admitted to them all of the wrongs and all of these defects and the fear and anxiety to those people, and felt closer to my Creator than I had ever felt in my life, that I had finally gotten down through all of the veneer of years and years of deceiving myself. I finally got down to my true self, warts and all, and I then took that, after meeting with some people, over to Marytown, which is a shrine for Maximilian Kolbe, and I got on my knees and I prayed to have God remove those defects of character, and then for His love and His grace and His direction and His wisdom to flow into my life as that had been taken away and taken out of my life, and have His grace flow in so that I can change. As that process occurred, and as I said, I never felt closer to my Creator ever, I then was willing to make a list of all of those relationships, all of that fear, all of that anger, all of the things that I needed to correct. I wrote them all down and then began the process of making amends to the people that I had hurt, one at a time, one meeting at a time. I've completed that process, and within that, I was had just completed the fifth step, which is admitting that to my priest and to these close friends all of my character defects and all of the people that I had harmed. The next morning, at about 9 o'clock, as I returned from the AA meeting, my cell phone rang, and it was a Minnesota area code, and my brother and a lot of close family live in Minnesota, but it wasn't their number. And so, well, it must be a cold call, I'm not going to pick it up. And I set the phone down, and a voice or something said, pick up the phone and answer it. So I did. And as I picked up the phone, I rang it. I said, Mike Roser, and the gentleman said, Jay Pivick. Oh, shit. Sorry, my vernacular again. It was my college basketball coach, whom I had not spoken with for 34 years. And I was so mad at him. It was rage, actually. And unfortunately, it had built up over the years into something that, I wouldn't have even gone to his funeral. And he simply said to me, I am Mike, Coach Pivick. I just retired from coaching. I was elected into the Coaching Hall of Fame, and they wrote an article about me in the Minnesota Star Tribune. I thought you might be interested in it. They asked me who my 5 favorite basketball players were in the 35 years of coaching, and you were number 1. And they asked me about you, and I thought you might be interested to read that in the paper. God, as I understand, God works in mysterious ways, because I had just gone through what I thought was a cleaning up of my house, and I had buried this so far down deep inside of me that it didn't occur to me to write him down as a person that I needed to reconcile with. Well, here's God at work in my life directly. I said, Coach Piv, I am thankful that you called. I'm an alcoholic. I've been going through this 12-step process, and I just completed a moral inventory of myself and so on and so forth. And here you are calling me out of the blue after 34, 35 years. I am trying to be different. I'm trying to live a spiritual life. And the reason that I'm mad at you after all of these years is because you took me out of my final game. I had a chance to break the Jamestown College scoring record. And I had a chance to do all these things. We were still 10 points down. We could have gotten back in the game. My self-centered, selfish view of this story that had grown, unfortunately, over 34 years. A resentment is anger that you can relive each and every moment as if it just occurred. That is something that I simply don't want and can't afford in my life anymore. And when I get angry, that's simply a resentment under construction. And this lesson taught me I need to get rid of those. I need to work very hard on getting rid of them. As Coach and I talked, he said to me, Mike, there's a few things in my coaching career that I did that I didn't like. And his excuse was he pulled me out of the game and the rest of the seniors because he wanted to get a look at his team coming back next year's team. And since we were out of the game, thanks, but I'm getting a look at next year's team. You guys go sit down on the end of the bench. My last game as a collegiate basketball player. My last competitive basketball game, period. Very angry at him, and he said to me that was a mistake and I wish I wouldn't have done that. So within 10 to 15 minutes, in God's world, in God's dimension, I repaired a feud that had lasted 34, 35 years. I can't even describe to you how close of a relationship we have now. Again, it's 803 days. God's grace in living a spiritual life has done for me what I never could have done on my own. So, what's next? And how do I go about now living this abundant life that I'm talking about, and how to fix physical, emotional, now I'm going to introduce financial and spiritual.